Good evening. Thank you very much for joining our program tonight. For Current Affairs Briefing in English, we'll be speaking with Dr. Edward De Bono. Should you wish to watch Dr. Edward De Bono in Maltese, please follow Net Live on Net TV. Thank you very much for joining our program this week, Dr. De Bono.
Good evening.
We're covering some current affairs in English because people have been asking a lot of questions and there's very little content in English. And I know that those who wish to see you can see you on other programs on Net TV. Can we start by speaking about your victory in court this week?
The leader of the opposition, and Dr. Delia, had asked the court to declare that the state advocate can act independently of government authorization to bring back the monies which had been stolen, defrauded by Vitals and Stewart, and all those that helped them in this act of collusion concerning the taking of our hospitals. And what happened was that the state advocate, when we asked him to take this action, he refused to do so because he stated that he is the advocate of the cabinet of government and he can't act without government authorization. The first hall of the civil court, presided by Mr. Justice Tony Abela, decided that the state advocate was correct and that he could not act without the Prime Minister's or Cabinet's authorization in demanding that all that has been stolen by Vitals and Stewart and those who acted in collusion with him, because as you know, they are responsible as well jointly and severally together, and we can demand payment from all the people who were directly or indirectly involved in this, I would say, fraud. He still refused to act in this way, stating that he has acted against Vitals and Stewart in the international arbitration which is being held abroad. Obviously, he acted only by reacting to this because Vitals and Stewarts had demanded that the Maltese government should pay them the 100 million euros which Konrad Mizzi had signed up to them, even in the event that the first lawsuit, would have been won by the Malta government. In this situation, now stewards are demanding that the Malta government pays them this amount of money which was contracted between them. But in that event, it would be ludicrous that this would happen because what has been stolen and what has been defrauded, all the corollary concerns would not be valid. And in that instance, the Malta government decided to ask for damages from Vitals and Stewart to pay us back all that has been taken by them in the circumstances. Mm-hmm. So, you know as much as I do that presently Vitals are in liquidation and bankruptcy.
Absolutely, and now Stewarts have been taken over by another company.
Exactly.
So this makes it more complicated.
Not all makes it more complicated. If you're a bankrupt company, you cannot pay the damages that should have been paid.
But they do own a lot of real estate.
They do own a lot of real estate, but there are more liabilities than there are assets in the said company. If I recollect correctly, there are about 9 billion debts which have to be paid by steward. And if this is so, then there is no way that the company can make these payments, and in actual fact, it is currently insolvent. So we are demanding that the Maltese people who were involved in this fraud, who are jointly and severally responsible with steward, should pay back this amount of money to the Maltese coffers. And this is why we asked the state advocate to take action against these people, as Article 1051A of the Civil Code stipulates. So we had the situation that now the first hall of the Civil Court declared that there was no action which the state advocate can take against these people and against Stewart, and so we appealed. The leader of the opposition and Dr. Delia appealed from the judgment meted out by Mr. Justice Tony Abela. And the Court of Appeal last Monday, on the 2nd of December, decided that the leader of the opposition's claim and Dr. Delia's claim that the state advocate can act independently from government authorization is a fact granted to him by the Constitution, by Article 91A of the Constitution, and therefore he does not need any authorization to do so.
What are your comments about the outcome?
Being the facetious man that he is, unfortunately, the state advocate declared on that same day that despite this authorization, he is not going to act against neither Stewart or Vitals, and neither against all those Maltese officials, the highest Maltese officials, who acted in a fraudulent manner with these companies. I think the judgment of the Court of Appeal is a landmark judgment which gives authority to the state advocate to safeguard the state from abusive action by its ministers or its functionaries or its permanent secretaries who should have acted in a decent way but did not act.
Illum reġet rebħet Malta. Dalgħodu l-Qorti tal-Appell għadha kif ikkonfermat dak illi ilna nitolbu aħna illi l-Avukat tal-Istat għandu id-dritt u d-diskrezzjoni illi jmexxi u jiftaħ il-kawża biex jinġabru il-flus tal-poplu Malti mingħajr id-direzzjoni ta' ħadd.
Il-qorti fil-fatt ikkonfermat li l-Avukat tal-Istat huwa fid-dmir li jaġixxi u jieħu l-passi neċessarji biex jibda l-proċeduri dwar is-serqa tal-isptarijiet. Bernard Gregg sostna li l-Prim Ministru ma rridx jiftaħ din il-kawża u l-qorti issa qalet li fil-fatt l-Avukat tal-Istat jista' jiftaħ din il-kawża mingħajr l-intħil ta' ħadd. Il-kap tal-Partit Nazzjonalista saħaq li mill-ġdid kien il-Partit Nazzjonalista li ħadem fl-interess tal-poplu fil-waqt li Abela baqa' m'għamel xejn, anzi prova jiddefendi il-korrotti u l-frodi li sar quddiem il-qorti. Bernard Gregg fisser kif din hija kisba oħra tal-Partit Nazzjonalista illi minkejja li qiegħed fl-oppożizzjoni xorta qed jaħdem għal ġid tal-poplu kollu.
Irnexxielna nġibu dak illi stajna nġibu mill-oppożizzjoni. Ma stajniex niftu l-kawża aħna għall-400 miljun, ma stajniex inġalu lil Robert Abela jagħmilha tajnieh l-appoġġ tagħna. Però rajna x'nistgħu nagħmlu. U aħna ma bqajniex idejna fuq żaqna. Aħna morna fil-qorti u tlabna l-qorti tiddikjara lill avukat tal-Istat wara li aħna għamilnilu anka l-proteġġ ġudizzjarju biex hu jiftaħ il-kawża baqa' ma fetaħiex għax qalilna illi huwa m'għandux id-dritt li jiftaħ il-kawża jekk ma jagħti istruzzjoni tal-Prim Ministru. Aħna morna l-qorti u l-qorti tatna raġun.
Min-naħa tiegħu x-Shadow Minister Adrian Delia sostna li din il-battalja kontra l-frodi li jagħmel il-Gvern ilha li bdiet numru ta' snin ilu u l-qorti dejjem sabet li l-Partit Nazzjonalista kellu raġun.
Il-Gvern qatt mariet illi jinbnew it-tliet sptarijiet, qatt mariet illi jagħti l-aqwa servizz tas-saħħa lill-poplu Malti Wawċi. Il-Gvern rid biss kellu pjan premeditat biex jisraq biex jiddefrawda il-poplu Malti Wawċi. U dik il-kawża konna rbaħnija billi ġibna lura 3 sptarijiet. Imma ma kienx biżejjed. għax aħna ridna nuru li dak li huwa tal-poplu ma jħodu laħat.
Dan il-każ kien tressaq is-sena l-oħra mill-kap tal-Partit Nazzjonalista Bernard Grekk u mid-deputat nazzjonalista Adrian Delija. L-avukati Edward De Bono u Nicolas De Bono assistew il-Partit Nazzjonalista.
And what is the next step?
Now, if the state advocate does not act as he ought to act, then there are other avenues. The Court of Appeal also indicated that all members of Parliament can actually act consequentially to the rescission of the contracts which had been granted in the first judgment by the Court of Appeal last October 2023, if I'm not mistaken, that they can also act to demand damages from all those people that are involved. Now, this is the state we are actually in. So, if the state advocate is not going to act in this way, the leader of the opposition and Dr. Delia may ask the courts to declare that all those people involved in this fraud, who are currently undergoing criminal action before the Court of Magistrates in the compilation of evidence which is taking place before Magistrate Rachel Montebello and Magistrate Leonard Caruana, to actually pay, together with Stewart, all that the Maltese state has been defrauded.
But it's not Stewart anymore, because Stewart has been taken over by another company in the US. How does that leave the situation now?
I seriously doubt whether we're going to get a penny from Stewart, because as I told you previously, this company is in bankruptcy. There are bankruptcy proceedings, and not only bankruptcy proceedings, but also criminal action taken against Ralph Della Torre and Armin Ernst, who was the CEO of Stewart and Vitals before the takeover by Stewart. And I'm sure you have read in the newspapers that the FBI and the State Department has taken control of the mobile phones of both Ralph Della Torre and Armin Ernst. They coincidentally have given the password to the FBI. They had to do it because the American system seems to work differently from our local system, but Joseph Muscat, corrupt Joseph Muscat, refused to do so. And so one would expect that one would know what communication there has been between Ralph Della Torre and the Maltese officials, and Armin Ernst and the Maltese officials. So one would expect the developments in the coming months to see the involvement of the Maltese officials in this heinous crime they have committed against the Maltese and Gozitan people.
Dr. Ralph De La Torre said he was committed to offering world-class medical care and employment opportunities in the communities they serve. Instead, we stand here today with the parade of horribles that Stewart has left behind. A bankrupt hospital system, closed hospitals, laid off workers, dead patients, and a CEO who blatantly refused in order to appear before the United States Senate.
With regards to the criminal action in the US, you mentioned Ralph Della Torre, who made some very incriminating remarks about government officials in Malta. What are your comments about that? Can you sort of shed some light how this person got through the system here?
Because as normally happens, when a ship is sinking, the rats run over the place, and start blaming one another. And this is what is actually happening now. Ralph de la Torre and Armin Ernst are obviously trying to shift the blame of what all they would have done onto these Maltese officials, who now are in the dock here in Malta and should spill the beans and tell the Maltese people the whole story, what happened, how these hospitals were given to people who were incompetent, because don't forget, Vitals was a €500 paper company. There was no money behind it, there was no experience behind the directors. Ram Tumuluri did not have any direction of hospitals, if I'm not mistaken, only of an Ayurveda clinic in India and Canada. And if one were to go into the website of these clinics, one would see immediately that even they had gone into bankruptcy and criminal proceedings were taken against Ram Tumuluri in Canada. In these circumstances, there is a lot to be said against all those people who gave the go-ahead for this takeover to take place by Vitals and stewards. They were not competent to actually manage our hospitals. They made a whole mess of it. And the tragedy of it all is that the Maltese officials were more intent of safeguarding the interests of Vitals and stewards than the interests of the Maltese people.
Mm-hmm.
We've lost as a nation circa €400 million till 2022, which have to be brought back to our coffers to help the Maltese people in all their needs. We are in dire needs to have more schools, to have a hospital which fits a growing population of 700,000, and without this capital, squandered as it was on people who do not deserve to have received it, should render them more responsible in their actions and in the way they are to respond to the Maltese people.
Ralph de la Torre, who incidentally is a cardiac surgeon, had already owed a lot of money by the time he appeared in Malta.
Yes, I have no doubt of that. Today, from what has been discovered through the press, his liabilities ran over $9 billion, and there aren't assets worth more than 7-8 billion. So he's 1 billion short of assets which have to be paid to the creditors.
So what are the next steps for your case in Malta?
The next step in Malta is now, if the state advocate doesn't move against the Maltese officials who've acted irresponsibly towards the people who elected them, have to actually be held jointly responsible in damages for the recovery of these millions of euros which have been defrauded. If they have 400 million stashed in the banks, either immovable or in immovable assets, one does not know. But every penny they have has to be paid back for all that has been stolen from the people.
I'd like to refer to a recent article in the Times of Malta about Jürgen Fenech seeking bail, saying that the law is now on his side. Can you explain this to us?
First of all, it is a shame that 7 years have passed. I think 6 years from the arrest of Jürgen Fenech, and we haven't yet got a jury completed, finalized, and Daphne Caruana Galizia's family, husband, children, daughters, and sisters see the end of this tragedy. It seems that our system has let this family down completely, because it is unacceptable in a democracy, in a Western democracy, that the jury takes more than 7 years to start. And we haven't yet seen the light at the end of the tunnel. One hopes that in the coming year, this jury commences and we call it a day.
And is this because of the way the court system works in Malta?
No, this is on account of frivolous objections brought up by the defense in the client's interest to muddle the waters. As you know as much as I do, the longer a process takes to commence, the more evidence is lost on the way. The more evidence is muddled. The more people forget the nitty-gritty of what happened. And this is a ploy which defense lawyers use regularly in the interest of the client to muddle the waters. It seems that they have temporarily succeeded, but it's high time that our judges call it a day, and in actual fact, this jury commences as soon as possible.
And the other news I'd like you to address is the recent fraud that took place in the office of former Minister Clayton Bartolo. Can you give us an update on this?
I think the fraud is twofold. First, there was the issue of his wife's employment in Clint Camilleri's Gozo ministry, when Mrs. Amanda Bartolo has not even set foot in the Gozo ministry for half a day's work, because she was still working from her husband's ministry in Malta. That's part of the issue. And it has now transpired that somebody who was involved with Mr. Bartolo, some contract given to some contractor, in some form or other, 50,000 euros have finished in the bank account of Mrs. Bartolo. Obviously, this was blatantly prima facie, seems fraudulent, and the Prime Minister had no option but to demand the resignation of Mr. Bartolo, and that action commences against the spouses Bartolo for this crime.
And what do you believe the outcome should be in this case?
I think we are halfway there, because we haven't yet mentioned that who acted with Clayton Bartolo for his wife to get this fictitious job, that is Clint Camilleri,
I was going to ask
should
you.
also pay the brunt of his lack of responsibility, and he should also resign. In a normal Western democracy, a European Western democracy, the way we see things, Prime Minister Fillon in France, when he was accused of corruption, he was made to resign. In South Korea, the Prime Minister acted corruptly, or allegedly corruptly, he was made to resign. So, this is the basis of the way a democracy should work. It seems in our country, these principles of democratic action, of doing the right thing, and if not doing the right thing, you have to go, hasn't yet sunk in the psyche of the people who govern us.
Would you expect any reaction from the police commissioner in this case?
I expected much better from the police commissioner, who has absolutely let me down, because I always felt that he was capable of moving things forward, but he seems to be completely stuck in a quagmire that doesn't want to move in an efficient way to let the rule of law work as it ought to work.
And what are your comments about Minister Caruana, who has spoken about his predecessor, former Minister Scicluna, in similar cases like this?
I must say that I think Mr. Clyde Caruana is an efficient economist who has the intelligence to do things correctly and decently. Whether he has the integrity to do so, that is another matter for one to consider. I don't think he has the goal and the capability of stopping his government from the financial abuses that in actual fact are being taking place in the administration of our country, financial administration of our country. He hasn't actually taken action against all those who have abused and asked for monies which were not due to be paid but given to them.
So it is a similar case to Minister Scicluna.
Yes, don't forget that under the government of Robert Abela, monies to stewards, if I'm not mistaken about 250 million, had been paid in the heinous crime of a contract which was declared null and void. Clyde Caruana was part of that administration when these payments were being made. So yes, he as well is to answer for the criminality which has taken place, and despite reports from the Auditor General stating that this contract was fraudulent, they kept paying on millions and millions. First under the government of corrupt Muscat, and then under the government of Robert Abela, with Clyde Caruana as also a Minister of Finance. In my view, as soon as there was a decision from the Auditor General stating that this contract was fraudulent, no further payments had to be effected. Let's be clear, not in wages, not in payments to the functionaries of the paramedics in the hospitals, apart from that, but further payments for the refurbishment of the hospitals that never took place should have been stopped immediately, and not we continued to pay millions of euros, millions and millions of euros for no reason whatsoever. So, both Prime Minister Robert Abela and Clyde Caruana and Professor Scicluna and Joseph Muscat and Conrad Mitzi and all the permanent secretaries in their ministries should bear the responsibility of the lack of action, of the inability to stop the fraud. There was a dereliction of duty, and once there's a dereliction of duty, they are co-responsible for the reimbursement of all the damage that has been sustained.
Dr. Debona, we've seen many protests recently. Do you think they make an impact for the government to react?
I am pretty sure that they do. And it is a pity that not enough thousands are present in these protests to actually object to what government is doing. Every time there's a protest called by the Nationalist Party, thousands of people already go into the streets, but we need to have more tens of thousands of people protesting these heinous crimes.
Do you think protests make a difference?
Absolutely.
Because many people are quite upset about recent happenings, but
Absolutely.
they don't actually come out to protest. So how important is that?
Essential. The more we protest, the more there is a chance to have people or government reacting to people's anger. People are angry. Even people from the Labour Party are angry about what is happening. They do not understand. A clear point is the fact that when the Prime Minister called his parliamentary group to a meeting at Pietà or in Hamrun, half of them did not turn up. He was told, or he tried to make a statement, that he's not going to accept that he would be considered a victim or responsible for the loss of an election which he is prospecting on account of the responsibility that he has. He doesn't want to assume that responsibility for a loss of an election, but he knows that half his cabinet and half his parliamentary group are not supporting him in the way he is governing this nation. He is actually not governing, letting everyone act free for all without giving direction to the people who are in the various ministries and their underlings in a way which is effective and which makes sense.
But do you think he should resign?
I think if this situation of lack of coordination between the government and the ministries and the office of the Prime Minister continues in this way, I think he has no option but early next year or mid next year to call an election.
Thank you very much for your time and for joining us today, Dr. De Bono. Thank you very much for watching our Current Affairs briefing in English. I spoke with Dr. Edward De Bono. Should you wish to follow him in Maltese, you can watch him frequently on Net Live on Net TV. I'm Leah Hogg for Net TV. Should you have any comments or queries, please send them to the number that appears on the screen. We'll be taking a short commercial break.